I stopped doing jokes immediately as soon as people found out that he was an alcoholic and had emotional problems.
Johnny Carson was Hollywood's gatekeeper.
Ladies and gentlemen, here's Johnny.
But not every legend who sat across from him was what they seemed. Behind the laughter and glamour, he sensed something darker. Now, the truth is out. Carson revealed 9 Golden Age stars whose charm masked true evil. These iconic guests, once adored by millions, harbored disturbing secrets. Carson saw through their facades, exposing the darkness that fame tried to hide. These are the 9 stars he unmasked. The Persona and the Predator. The Case of Errol Flynn. When you think of Errol Flynn, you think of adventure. The dashing Robin Hood, the heroic Captain Blood. He was the epitome of the Hollywood leading man, charming, daring, and impossibly handsome. He was Hollywood's golden pirate, dashing rogue who stole hearts with a sword in hand and a grin on his face. On screen, he was the embodiment of adventure, but off-screen, the stories were far darker. Flynn was infamous for scandal, reckless living, and cruel indulgence. Accusations of assault, a reputation for preying on young women, and endless affairs painted a picture of a man who lived without boundaries and cared little for the damage left behind. His charm masked something far more sinister. The golden boy of the silver screen had a dark secret, and it's a secret that Johnny Carson, a man known for his quick wit and sharp observations, couldn't ignore. Flynn was a frequent guest on The Tonight Show, and he always delivered. He'd regale the audience with stories of his escapades, his yachting adventures, his legendary parties. But behind the charming rogue persona, there was a darkness that even the most jaded Hollywood insider found disturbing. Johnny Carson, according to those who worked with him, found Flynn's swagger to be a well-rehearsed act. He saw a man whose playboy lifestyle wasn't just about fun. It was about power, control, and a shocking disregard for others. The stories of his debauchery weren't just about being a wild bachelor. They were about exploitation. Johnny often teased Flynn about his wild life, hinting at the controversies without ever saying them outright. Flynn would laugh, deflect, or brag about his adventures, but Carson's smirk told the audience everything. They weren't just hearing a charming rogue, they were watching a man reveal his own recklessness. Carson, a family man at heart, was reportedly repulsed by Flynn's predatory nature. The casual stories of his exploits, which were played for laughs on the show, were a chilling glimpse into a man who saw women not as people, but as conquests. The charming persona was a mask, and Carson saw the rot underneath. He saw the predator and the cruelty, long before the public was ready to acknowledge it. Johnny Carson let Errol Flynn laugh about his scandals, quietly exposing that Hollywood's favorite hero was, in reality, its most dangerous villain. How did Johnny Carson's genius reveal more beloved stars as evil, and which was most shocking to everyone? The stolen spotlight, the calculated cruelty of Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford's name itself conjures an image of high-stakes Hollywood drama. She was a powerhouse, a legend, and an icon of the silver screen. She was also a frequent guest on The Tonight Show, and she was known for her intense, almost theatrical presence. She entered Carson's stage like royalty, poised, elegant, her voice smooth as silk. Joan Crawford was more than a star. She was Hollywood personified. During the Depression era, Crawford frequently portrayed determined young women who rose from modest beginnings to achieve both love and financial stability. Audiences, particularly women, connected deeply with these rags-to-riches tales. Her success in such roles propelled her into the spotlight as one of Hollywood's leading stars and made her among the highest-earning women in America. Many saw glamour, diamonds, and power, but behind the mascara and broad shoulders lay a reputation that still haunts pop culture today. Crawford was America's dream on screen, yet her daughter, Christina, painted her as America's nightmare in real life. In the shocking memoir, Mommy Dearest, Christina accused Joan of terrifying abuse, violent outbursts, manipulative punishments, and the infamous no-wire hangers cruelty. Whether every story was true or embellished, it cemented Crawford's legacy as one of Hollywood's darkest mothers. On Carson's couch, she laughed politely, sipping her drink with grace. But Johnny, sharp as ever, probed at her tough reputation. Crawford always dodged with charm, yet offstage, whispers told of her brutal competitiveness. She reportedly sabotaged rivals, spreading rumors to ensure her place at the top. And her feud with Bette Davis was legendary. Crawford allegedly tried to destroy Davis's career, even sleeping with Davis's lovers out of spite. According to the legend, Johnny Carson saw through the high-drama persona. He saw the cold, calculated cruelty that lay just beneath the surface. While the public saw a dedicated, driven artist, Carson saw a woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted, and whose ruthless ambition extended to her personal relationships. The stories of her alleged abuse of her adopted children, particularly her daughter Christina, were still whispered rumors in the Golden Age. But Carson, with his incredible network of Hollywood confidants, heard the truth. He saw a woman whose public persona of a doting mother and dedicated professional was a complete fabrication. He saw the manipulation, the emotional abuse, and the cold, unfeeling nature that drove her. With a strong sense of right and wrong, he found Crawford's cruelty to be utterly repugnant. He saw a woman who was not just difficult or demanding, but who was truly, deeply, and pathologically evil. Her drive wasn't a positive trait. It was a destructive force that consumed everyone around her. Who did Carson reveal as the twisted genius, slyly showing his evil to everyone's surprise? The jester and the jackal. The twisted genius of W.C. Fields. W.C. Fields was the master of the deadpan, the curmudgeon with a heart of gold, or so we were led to believe. His comedy was built on a persona of a misanthropic, hard-drinking grump, and he was a favorite on The Tonight Show. Some of his most recognizable traits included his funny use of body movements, his rough, drawling voice, his big nose, and his habit of using exaggerated fancy words. The character he played in films and on radio was seen as an extension of his real personality. From 1915, his trademark stage outfit usually included a top hat, a long coat with a special collar, and a cane. Interestingly, this look closely resembled the comic strip character Ali Sloper, who may have inspired his costume. When W.C. Fields appeared on Johnny Carson's show, or was brought up in conversation, the audience expected humor. He was the funny man with the nasal drawl, the master of sarcastic one-liners, and the clown who turned drinking jokes into art. But behind that dry comedy was a man who many insiders described as mean, bitter, and, at times, truly cruel. Fields shaped his public image around the idea of being a man who disliked people. He often joked that he couldn't stand dogs, children, or women, and audiences laughed, believing it was all just part of his comedy act. But according to those who knew him well, there was some truth behind the jokes. In reality, Fields had a strong dislike for children. He admitted privately that being around them made him uncomfortable and even annoyed. Because of this, he usually kept his distance and avoided situations where he might have to deal with them. On film sets, this attitude became clear. He had little patience for child actors and would often lose his temper if they made mistakes or didn't follow directions properly. So, while fans saw his jokes as harmless humor, those close to him understood that Fields genuinely carried those feelings off stage too. Johnny Carson, a master of comedic timing himself, admired Fields' genius. Yet, his admiration was mixed with an underlying discomfort. To audiences, Fields came across as a charming troublemaker, a mischievous but harmless rogue. Carson, however, sensed something darker. He believed that beneath the humor lay a very real bitterness and hostility. Fields' misanthropy wasn't a comedic act. It was a genuine and deeply held belief. The man who made us laugh at his disdain for children was, in reality, a cruel and bitter man. The stories of his pranks and his feuds, which were often played for laughs, were actually acts of calculated cruelty. Carson, with his incredible ability to read people, saw that the laughter was a shield, a way for Fields to express his genuine disdain for humanity without consequence. Carson saw a man who didn't just play a character, but who was the character. And the character was truly evil. The man who made a career out of being a curmudgeon was, in reality, a cold-hearted misanthrope who found joy in the suffering of others. Did Carson's talent for sensing the truth mean he knew when cruelty wasn't just a punchline? Well, we'll see. The Siren and the Shadow. The calculated betrayal of Tallulah Bankhead. Tallulah Bankhead was a name that screamed glamour, defiance, and a kind of reckless abandon. She was a legend of the stage and screen, a woman who lived life on her own terms. She wasn't just a star, she was a storm in human form. Known for her razor tongue, scandalous behavior, and unapologetic wildness, she could entertain a crowd, but at the same time, she often left people feeling intimidated or even a little scared of her. Bankhead smoked constantly, drank heavily, and carried herself with a boldness that few others could match. On The Tonight Show, she became a favorite guest because her interviews were always full of quick, witty comebacks, outrageous jokes, and a kind of energy that felt exciting but also unpredictable, almost dangerous. However, Johnny Carson, with his gift for reading people, was able to see past her glamorous, wild mask. To most, Bankhead looked like a carefree spirit who lived life without limits. But Carson understood that her dramatic behavior wasn't only about freedom, it was also a way of controlling situations and people around her. When she came on The Tonight Show, he handled her perfectly. Instead of trying to soften her or ignore her wild side, Carson leaned into it. He joked about her drinking, teased her about her scandals, and gave her space to be herself. At the same time, with his clever responses, he subtly showed the audience that the Tallulah they admired on stage was not an act. She was just as bold, sharp, and unpredictable in real life. The stories of her promiscuity, her substance use, and her wild parties, which were often played for laughs, were a chilling glimpse into a woman who used others for her own amusement and who had no regard for the emotional consequences of her actions. Carson saw a woman who thrived on chaos and who found joy in the destruction of others' lives. He saw that her charisma was a weapon, and she used it to lure people in, only to discard them when they were no longer useful. Carson saw the shadow behind the siren, and it was a shadow of cold, heartless manipulation. But how did Carson let Tallulah Bankhead subtly reveal herself as evil? When Johnny Carson let Tallulah laugh at her own scandals, he wasn't simply entertaining America. He was showing everyone that the most dangerous thing about her was that every shocking story might actually be true. The Hollywood Saint and the Hidden Sadist. The Tragic Fall of Judy Garland. Judy Garland was a face synonymous with hope, with magic, with the American dream. She was the girl next door, the voice of a generation, a national treasure. To the world, Judy Garland was Dorothy, the innocent girl following the yellow brick road, but behind that voice, behind the sparkle of the Wizard of Oz, Judy was chewed up by the studio system from childhood. Fed pills to wake her up, pills to keep her thin, pills to put her to sleep, she became a prisoner of addiction. Her frequent appearances on The Tonight Show were a mix of heartbreaking vulnerability and a truly disturbing darkness. Johnny Carson, known for his empathy and his kindness, was reportedly deeply affected by Judy Garland. But what he saw wasn't just a fragile star struggling with addiction. He saw something much darker. He saw a woman who had been so deeply traumatized and abused by the Hollywood system that she had, in a twisted way, become a sadist herself. As the years went on, her sweetness had soured. Friends and family described her as manipulative, unpredictable, and, at times, cruel in her desperation. The stories of her volatile behavior, her legendary meltdowns, and her cruel treatment of those who worked with her were not just the result of her addiction. They were, in Carson's view, a manifestation of a deeply wounded soul lashing out. He saw a woman who, having been a victim for so long, had learned to inflict pain on others. Carson had a gift. He could let a star's real self slip through without a single blunt question. With Judy, he teased her about her chaotic energy, joked about her being unpredictable, and guided the conversation so that her nervous laughter revealed more than her words. Watching her on The Tonight Show, audiences saw not just the legend, but the woman cracking beneath the weight of her demons. Carson saw the public persona of the vulnerable, tragic star as a carefully constructed myth. He saw a woman who, in her own words, had become a monster. He saw the dark side of a human being who had been broken by the system, and who, in turn, had become a destructive force herself. He never embarrassed her. He respected her. But by letting her ramble, by letting the nervousness play out, he revealed a woman battling herself. Judy Garland wasn't Dorothy anymore. She was a haunted star, clinging to the stage because the stage was the only place she still felt alive. The Golden Age's hidden tyrant, the case of Bette Davis. Bette Davis was a person who commanded respect. She was a titan of the screen, a force of nature, a woman who bent Hollywood to her will. She had eyes that could slice through glass, and a personality to match. On screen, she was magnetic, bold, fiery, and unforgettable, but off-screen, Davis was notorious for being ruthless, cutting down rivals, humiliating co-stars, and ruling sets with an iron tongue. She carried bitter feuds her whole life, most famously with Joan Crawford, and even her own daughter accused her of cruelty and emotional abuse. To many in Hollywood, Davis wasn't just strong, she was dangerous. Her appearances on The Tonight Show were legendary, a masterclass in fiery wit and unapologetic directness. But behind the fierce independence, Johnny Carson reportedly saw a true tyrant. While the public saw a woman who fought for her artistic integrity, Carson saw a woman who was pathologically cruel. He didn't flatter her the way others might. He leaned into her sharpness, letting her biting wit reveal itself. He would set up a playful question, then sit back as Davis delivered a scathing remark that left the audience roaring, but also a little uneasy. He gave her the stage, and in doing so, he exposed the very thing people whispered about, that Bette Davis loved cruelty as much as applause. The stories of her feuds, which were often played for laughs, were a chilling glimpse into a woman who found joy in tearing others down. Carson saw that her ambition was not just about making great art. It was about power and control. He saw a woman who was so consumed by her own ego that she would destroy anyone who stood in her way and who had no regard for the emotional wreckage she left behind. Carson was a genius. He never accused, never mocked. He simply let Davis be herself. And by the time the interview was over, viewers at home weren't just watching a Hollywood icon. They were watching a woman who thrived on venom, and Carson knew it. He saw the tyrant behind the trailblazer, and it was a chilling sight. He saw a woman who was cruel, truly, deeply, and irredeemably evil. When Johnny Carson handed Bette Davis on The Tonight Show, wasn't he just honoring her greatness? He was slyly showing America that her true power came from her cruelty. The charming charlatan, the viciousness of Milton Berle. Milton Berle, who was fondly called Mr. Television or Uncle Millie, the man who brought television to the masses. He was a force of nature, a relentless comedian who commanded the stage. His appearances on The Tonight Show were a whirlwind of jokes, stories, and a palpable sense of showmanship. Milton Berle was called Mr. Television for a reason. He practically owned the medium in the 1950s. On stage, he was outrageous, quick-witted, and beloved for his ability to make people laugh. But behind the curtain, Berle had a reputation that made even fellow comedians wary. He was accused of being a relentless egotist, stealing jokes from younger comics, and bullying anyone who threatened his throne. Stories swirled about his arrogance, his temper, and his cutthroat tactics to keep himself in the spotlight. And when Milton Berle joined Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show, Carson's talent for subtle revelation was on full display. Carson admired Berle's legacy, but he also knew how to expose a guest's true colors without ever being unkind. According to the legend, Johnny Carson saw something much darker behind the boundless energy. He saw a man who was not just a showman, but a charlatan. A man who would do anything to get a laugh, and who had no regard for the feelings of others. With Berle, Johnny would set up harmless questions that allowed the older comedian's arrogance to shine through. Berle loved to brag, and Carson, without a word of criticism, would let the bragging keep going until it became almost uncomfortable. The audience laughed, but Carson's smirk said it all. The joke wasn't on him. The joke was on Berle. The stories of his legendary ego, his ruthless competitiveness, and his willingness to steal jokes and routines from other comedians were not just industry gossip. They were, in Carson's view, a manifestation of a deeply insecure and vicious man. Carson saw that the laughter was a tool, a way for Berle to maintain his power and his control. He saw a man who would tear down anyone who stood in his way and who had no remorse for the pain he inflicted. He saw the viciousness behind the charm, and it was a truly chilling sight. Carson's genius was making people reveal themselves. He didn't challenge Berle directly. He didn't need to. But by the end of the interview, viewers weren't just watching Mr. Television. They were watching a man who couldn't resist showing off, even at the cost of looking foolish. The Golden Age's master manipulator. The case of Orson Welles. Orson Welles was that name synonymous with genius. He was a boy wonder, a cinematic revolutionary, a man who changed the very fabric of filmmaking. Orson Welles was a titan, the man who gave the world Citizen Kane, the voice behind the infamous War of the Worlds broadcast, the prodigy who changed cinema forever. But brilliance often comes with shadows. Welles was notorious for arrogance, manipulation, and a ruthless streak that left friends and collaborators burned. He betrayed colleagues, clashed with studios, and built a reputation as one of the most difficult men in Hollywood. To many, Wells wasn't just a genius, he was a tyrant. His appearances on The Tonight Show were a masterclass in storytelling, his voice a rich, sonorous instrument. When he sat across from Johnny Carson, all of it was there, hiding in plain sight. Johnny Carson saw a different side of the genius. He saw a man who was not just a master of his craft, but a master manipulator, a man who would use and discard anyone who stood in his way. Carson adored Wells's talent, but never allowed himself to be dwarfed by it. Instead, he played the perfect counterbalance. He teased Wells about his ego, prodded him about his weight, his projects, his failures, and watched as Wells puffed himself up to defend his genius. What made Carson so brilliant was that he didn't need to expose Wells's arrogance. He simply gave him space, and Wells exposed it himself. These stories of his legendary ego, his theatrical demands, and his willingness to betray those who trusted him were not just the eccentricities of a genius. They were, in Carson's view, the manifestations of a deeply narcissistic and cruel man. Carson saw that Wells's charisma was a weapon, and he used it to control others, to get what he wanted, and to discard them when they were no longer useful. He saw the master manipulator behind the master storyteller, and it was a truly chilling sight. He saw a man who was so consumed by his own ambition that he was willing to destroy others to achieve his goals. When Johnny had Orson on The Tonight Show, he knew he showed America the real Orson Welles, a man who demanded worship, who masked cruelty with charm, and who couldn't resist feeding his own legend, even at the risk of looking pompous. The tragic clown and the dark soul. The hidden cruelty of Lenny Bruce. Lenny Bruce was a man that changed comedy forever. He was a truth-teller, a prophet, a man who pushed the boundaries of what was possible on a stage. He was the comic who broke all the rules. He dared to speak what no one else would but to his critics. He was vulgar, dangerous, even corrupting. Bruce was arrested multiple times for obscenity, battled substance addiction, and left behind a reputation as a genius who destroyed himself. His evil wasn't the polished cruelty of old Hollywood. It was the chaos of a man who lived on the edge and dragged others into his storm. His appearances on The Tonight Show were a mix of brilliant insight and a palpable sense of danger. But according to the legend, Johnny Carson saw something much darker behind the tragic hero. He understood Bruce better than most. Carson respected comedy deeply, but he also respected discipline. When Bruce came up in conversation, or when his appearance on The Tonight Show was remembered, the quiet Carson revealed a quiet truth: that Lenny's brilliance was inseparable from his self-destruction. Carson would acknowledge his daring talent, but he'd also slyly point out the danger of going too far, of burning bridges with no way back. With Carson, the revelation was that Lenny Bruce wasn't ruined by censors alone. He was ruined by his own demons. He saw a man whose honesty was not a form of moral courage, but a form of psychological cruelty. The stories of his bitter feuds, his vicious attacks on those who he felt wronged him, and his willingness to use his comedy as a weapon were not just the eccentricities of a brilliant artist. They were, in Carson's view, the manifestations of a deeply wounded and deeply cruel man. Carson saw that Bruce's charisma was a tool, and he used it to tear down others, to humiliate them, and to inflict pain. He saw the dark soul behind the tragic clown, and it was a truly chilling sight. He saw a man who was cruel and sinister, someone who seemed to take pleasure in the pain of others. Carson's gift was balance. He didn't glorify Bruce as a martyr, nor did he dismiss him as obscene. He let the audience see both sides, the genius who changed comedy and the man whose recklessness made him, in some eyes, his own worst enemy. Johnny Carson spoke of Lenny Bruce with both admiration and caution. He honored a fearless pioneer, and he revealed that sometimes the evil we fight isn't society at all, but the darkness within ourselves. The golden age of Hollywood. We look back on it with a sense of nostalgia, of a time when everything was simpler, more beautiful. But the truth, as Johnny Carson saw it, was much more complex. He was the man who saw the faces behind the masks, the darkness behind the light. He saw the monsters hiding in plain sight. And while we may never know the full extent of his private thoughts, the legend of the 9 Golden Age guests who were actually evil shows that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones we invite into our living rooms every night. Even in the bright light of the Golden Age, some shadows are too dark to ever fully disappear. From charming legends to dangerous egos, Johnny Carson revealed sides of Hollywood's Golden Age that audiences might never have seen otherwise. Which of these guests do you think Carson exposed the most? And do you believe today's late-night hosts could ever match his talent for pulling back the curtain? Johnny Carson was Hollywood's gatekeeper, but not every legend who sat across from him was what they seemed. Behind the laughter and glamour, he sensed something darker. Now, the truth is out. Carson revealed 9 Golden Age stars whose charm masked true evil. These iconic guests, once adored by millions, harbored disturbing secrets. Carson saw through their facades, exposing the darkness that fame tried to hide. These are the 9 stars he unmasked. The biggest names in Hollywood, music, and politics all wanted one thing: to sit across from Johnny Carson. His sharp wit and cool charm made everyone look relatable. But Johnny knew something most viewers didn't. Behind the polite laughter and sparkling gowns, some of his guests carried shadows. They weren't just stars. They were storms wrapped in sequins and tuxedos. Carson once joked that the celebrities he interviewed could fill entire volumes with their hidden stories. But, as the saying goes, every joke has a little truth. And we're opening that vault with these 9 Golden Age guests who weren't just complicated, they were, in many ways, actually evil. Not demons in the supernatural sense, but people whose dark sides shocked even those who knew them best. They were abusive parents, ruthless rivals, bullies, manipulators, and in some cases, men and women whose cruelty was talked about long after the cameras turned off. There's a story, a legend, really, that circulates among those who worked on The Tonight Show. A story of a private conversation, a moment of raw honesty, where the king of late night, the man who knew everyone, revealed the 9 Golden Age guests who were actually evil. This isn't just about a bad reputation or a difficult personality. It is about a darkness that Johnny Carson, with his unique gift for reading people, saw radiating from the stage. We'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories. Thanks for watching, and as Carson himself might say, we'll see you on the next show.